She stood in the rain, pregnant and trembling, as they threw her out like trash. His mother spat in her face. His mistress laughed. He signed the papers without looking back. They thought she was nothing, a woman with no money, no power, no future. But as the rain washed away her tears, she pulled out her phone and made one call. What happened next left them all speechless. Before we dive into this story, let me be honest with you. Most people will watch this entire video, get completely hooked, and then just leave. They won't subscribe, won't like, won't do anything to help this channel grow. Don't be that person. If you want to see more stories like this, stories where patience destroys arrogance and quiet power wins, subscribe right now. It takes 2 seconds. That's all I'm asking. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The storm hit like divine punishment, turning the Whitfield estate into a battlefield of rain and thunder. Serena Whitfield stood at the threshold of the mansion she'd called home for 5 years, clutching a single battered suitcase in one hand while the other rested protectively over her 6-month pregnant belly. Water poured from the sky in sheets, soaking through her clothes, plastering her hair to her face. But she didn't move. She couldn't. Not yet. Behind her, framed in the golden light of the doorway, like actors on a stage, stood the 3 people who had just destroyed her life. Or so they thought. Ethan Whitfield, her husband, held the divorce papers in his fist like a trophy. His tailored suit was dry, perfect, untouched by the chaos he'd created. That face she'd once loved now wore an expression of pure contempt, his jaw set, his eyes cold. "You're wasting time, Serena," he said, his voice flat. "The car's waiting at the gate. Don't make this more dramatic than it needs to be." Beside him, Veronica Whitfield, his mother, stood with her arms crossed over her chest, her designer dress immaculate. Her lips curled in a sneer that had become her permanent expression whenever she looked at Serena. And then there was Vanessa, the replacement, the upgrade, the woman Ethan had been flaunting for months. She leaned against Ethan's shoulder, her diamond earrings catching the light, her smile venomous and victorious. 5 years, Serena said quietly, her voice almost swallowed by the storm. 5 years I gave you. Ethan laughed, short and bitter. Gave us? You took from us, Serena. You lived in our house, spent our money, wore our name. What exactly did you give? Veronica stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor. You gave him nothing but disappointment. No connections. No influence. No value. You were a charity case from the beginning, and my son finally realized it. Vanessa tilted her head, studying Serena like she was something pitiful. Honestly, I don't know what he saw in you, but I guess everyone makes mistakes when they're young, right? She giggled, a sound like breaking glass. At least he's fixing it now. Serena's grip tightened on the suitcase handle, but her face remained calm. That calmness had been her shield for 5 years, through the subtle mockery at family dinners, through Veronica's constant reminders that she wasn't good enough, through the way Ethan stopped touching her, stopped looking at her, stopped pretending she mattered. They'd chipped away at her piece by piece, thinking her silence meant defeat. They had no idea what silence could hide. You think I'm nothing, Serena said, her voice steady despite the rain hammering around her. You've told me that in 1,000 different ways. But here's what you don't understand. I never needed your validation. I was just waiting. Ethan's smirk faltered. Waiting for what? Serena didn't answer. She simply looked at him, and in that look was something that made him shift uncomfortably. Veronica wasn't having it. She strode forward, closing the distance between them, her face twisted with rage. Waiting? For what, you delusional girl? For a miracle? For someone to save you? She leaned in close, her breath hot against Serena's face. You're 6 months pregnant with nowhere to go, no money, no family, no future. You're less than nothing. Vanessa laughed again, louder this time. This is almost sad to watch. Ethan, can we please just get this over with? I want to go back inside. It's freezing out here. Ethan nodded, grabbing the suitcase from Serena's hand and tossing it down the steps. It tumbled through the rain, landing in a puddle at the bottom with a splash. There. Now you're officially removed from this property. Don't come back. Serena watched the suitcase roll to a stop, her expression unchanged. Inside, though, something shifted. A switch flipped. A decision was made. She'd endured their cruelty because she'd been waiting for the right moment, cataloging every insult, every slight, every act of disrespect. And now, with her suitcase in the mud and rain running down her face, the moment had arrived. Veronica wasn't done. She stepped even closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. You know what your problem is, Serena? You never knew your place. You walked into this family thinking you belonged, but you never did. You were always beneath us. Always. She paused, her eyes scanning Serena's face for any sign of weakness. And now, finally, you're where you belong. Outside. Alone. Forgotten. Then, in an act so vile it seemed to freeze time itself, Veronica spat directly into Serena's face. The rain washed it away almost instantly, but the act hung in the air like a curse. Ethan didn't stop her. Vanessa clapped her hands, delighted. Oh my God, Veronica, you didn't, she squealed. That was perfect. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. Mom, you're savage. I love it. For the first time all night, Serena smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small, knowing curve of her lips that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her phone, and calmly wiped the screen with her sleeve. Her fingers moved with precision, dialing a number she'd memorized years ago, but had never needed until this exact moment. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, deep and commanding. Serena. It wasn't a question. It was recognition, authority, and power all wrapped into one word. Hello, Father, Serena said, her voice cutting through the storm like a blade. It's time you saw who they really are. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan's face went pale. Vanessa's smile vanished. Veronica froze, her confidence cracking like thin ice. Father. Ethan repeated, his voice uncertain. What are you? Serena raised a hand, silencing him without a word. On the other end of the line, her father's voice was calm, measured, and absolute. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't move. The call ended. Serena slipped the phone back into her pocket and looked at the three of them. Ethan, Vanessa, Veronica. Her face unreadable, but her eyes carrying something none of them had ever seen before. Power. Real, quiet, unshakable power. Who the hell was that? Veronica demanded, her voice sharp but edged with uncertainty. Serena didn't answer. She simply stood there, rain pouring over her, her hand resting on her belly, her expression serene. In the distance, the low rumble of engines began to grow louder. Headlights appeared at the gate, cutting through the storm like judgment itself. One car. 2. 3. Black SUVs rolling up the driveway in perfect formation, followed by a sleek Bentley that gleamed even in the rain. Ethan's confidence shattered. What the hell is this? Vanessa stepped back, her bravado dissolving. Ethan, who is that? Veronica's face went white. The cars stopped. Doors opened. Men in black suits stepped out, forming a line along the driveway. And from the Bentley emerged a man who commanded attention without saying a word. Thomas Wellington, Serena's father, impeccably dressed, his posture rigid with authority, his eyes cold and calculating. He walked toward them slowly, deliberately, his shoes clicking against the wet pavement like a countdown. When he reached Serena, he placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze never leaving the Whitfields. These are the people who thought they could humiliate my daughter. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of mountains. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Veronica tried to speak, but her voice failed her. Vanessa simply stared, her face pale with fear. Serena looked at her father, then back at the three people who had spent years making her feel small. They don't know, she said softly. They don't know about the 50 million. They don't know about the trusts. They don't know anything. Thomas Wellington's lips curved into the faintest smile. Then perhaps it's time they learned. The rain continued to fall, but Serena Whitfield was no longer trembling. The storm outside had nothing on the quiet storm she'd just unleashed inside the Whitfield empire. And as she stood there, surrounded by her father's men, her enemies frozen in fear, one truth became undeniable. They'd made the worst mistake of their lives, and there was no going back. Serena had learned a long time ago that silence was the most dangerous weapon a person could wield. While others wasted energy on threats and tantrums, she observed, calculated, and waited. For 5 years, she'd absorbed every insult like a sponge, catalogued every act of cruelty like evidence in a trial, and stored her rage in a place so deep even she sometimes forgot it was there. But it was always there, coiled tight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment had finally come, and the Whitfields had no idea what they'd unleashed. As Thomas Wellington's presence loomed over the estate like a storm cloud, Serena felt something shift inside her. Not anger, not satisfaction, but clarity. Pure, cold, devastating clarity. She'd spent years being told she was nothing, and now she was about to show them what nothing could become when pushed too far. Thomas looked at Ethan, Veronica, and Vanessa with a kind of disdain reserved for insects. "My daughter called me tonight," he said, his voice calm but laced with steel. "She told me how you've treated her. The insults, the humiliation, the violence." His eyes locked onto Veronica. "You spat on a pregnant woman. My pregnant daughter." Veronica opened her mouth to respond, but Thomas raised a hand, silencing her instantly. "I don't want to hear your excuses. I want you to understand something very clearly. Your family's empire, everything you've built, everything you think makes you untouchable, rests on foundations that can be removed. And I'm the one holding the keys." Ethan finally found his voice, though it came out shaky. "Who the hell are you?" Thomas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Thomas Wellington. Perhaps you've heard of me." The blood drained from Ethan's face. Wellington Industries, one of the largest private investment firms in the country. A name that moved markets, toppled companies, and crushed competitors without breaking a sweat. Serena had never mentioned her father, never spoke about her family, and the Whitfields had been too arrogant to ask. They'd assumed she was nobody because she acted like nobody, and that assumption was about to cost them everything. "You're lying," Vanessa said, her voice desperate. "Serena's nobody. She doesn't have a family like that. She's nobody." Thomas interrupted, his tone mocking. "Is that what you told yourselves to justify your cruelty?" He turned to Serena, his expression softening just slightly. "Did they ever ask about your mother, Serena? Did they ever wonder why you never spoke about where you came from?" Serena shook her head. "They never cared enough to ask." Thomas nodded. "Your mother, God rest her soul, was one of the smartest women I've ever known. Before she passed, she set up trusts, investments, and financial instruments so complex that even the best lawyers couldn't untangle them without her explicit instructions. She left everything to you, Serena. $50 million, give or take, depending on how the markets perform." He paused, letting the weight of that number settle over the Whitfields like a death sentence. "My daughter has been wealthy this entire time. She just chose not to tell you." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan's mouth hung open, his mind scrambling to process what he'd just heard. Veronica looked like she'd been slapped. Vanessa's face went from smug to horrified in the span of a heartbeat. $50 million? Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. "You had $50 million, and you never said anything?" Serena's expression remained calm, almost bored. "Why would I? You told me every day that I was worthless without your money. I wanted to see how long you'd keep saying it." She tilted her head, studying him like a specimen under glass. "Turns out you never stopped. Even when I was carrying your child, you still thought I was beneath you. That's the part that fascinates me, Ethan. How arrogant do you have to be to throw away someone without ever bothering to learn who they really are?" Veronica tried to recover, stepping forward with her hands raised. "Serena, let's not be hasty. We can talk about this. Whatever misunderstandings. Serena's voice was sharp enough to cut. "You spat in my face, Veronica. You threw my suitcase into the mud. You laughed while your son paraded his mistress in front of me. Where exactly is the misunderstanding?" Veronica's composure cracked further. We didn't know. If we'd known about your money, you would have treated me differently, Serena finished. Exactly. That's the problem. You only respect wealth, not people. And now you're going to learn what happens when you disrespect the wrong person. Thomas placed a hand on Serena's shoulder. You don't have to do this tonight. We can leave. Let them rot in their ignorance. But Serena shook her head. No, I've been quiet for too long. They need to understand what's coming. She turned to face the Whitfields fully, her voice steady and cold. For the past 5 years, I've watched you. I've studied how your business works, who you depend on, where your vulnerabilities are. You thought I was just a housewife, too stupid or too weak to understand finance, contracts, partnerships. But I understood everything. I just didn't tell you. Ethan's face twisted with confusion and fear. What are you talking about? Serena smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who'd been circling its prey for years. Do you remember the Hartley deal? The one that fell through last month? You blamed bad timing, bad luck. But it wasn't luck, Ethan. It was me. I bought the controlling shares in Hartley's company through a shell corporation. When the deal came up for approval, I made sure it died. Ethan staggered back like he'd been punched. That's impossible. You don't know anything about. I know everything, Serena interrupted. I know about the Henderson contract that's pending approval. I know about the bank loans you're relying on to cover the expansion into the West Coast. I know about the partnership with Dalton Industries that's supposed to close next quarter. And I'm going to make sure every single one of them falls apart. Vanessa's voice came out as a whisper. You can't do that. You're bluffing. Serena turned to her, her expression almost pitying. Am I? Tell me. Vanessa, how well do you know your brother Marcus? Vanessa's face went pale. What does Marcus have to do with this? Everything, Serena said. He reached out to me 3 months ago. Did you know that? He told me how you've treated him for years, how you stole his inheritance, how you manipulated your parents into cutting him out of the family business. He wanted revenge, and I gave him an opportunity. In exchange for information about your family's dealings, I promised to help him reclaim what you stole. He's been feeding me everything, financial records, contracts, internal communications. Every move you've made, I've known about it before you even finalized it. Vanessa stumbled backward, her hand clutching her chest. Marcus wouldn't. He wouldn't betray me. Why not? Serena asked. You betrayed him first. People don't forget that kind of pain, Vanessa. They just wait for the right moment to return it. Ethan's voice was desperate now, frantic. Serena, please. We can fix this. I made a mistake. I was stupid. I was cruel. But we can work this out. The baby. Think about the baby. Serena's hand moved to her belly, protective and firm. I am thinking about the baby. That's why I'm doing this. My child will grow up knowing that their mother didn't let anyone walk over her. They'll know that power isn't loud or violent. It's patient and precise. And they'll never have to see their father again. The finality in her voice shattered whatever hope Ethan had left. He dropped to his knees, his hands clasped together. Please. I'm begging you. Don't do this. Serena looked down at him. This man who'd once held all the power, who'd made her feel small and worthless, now broken and begging at her feet. She felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just the cold resolve of someone who'd already made their decision. Thomas stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. Serena has been more than patient with your family. She gave you years to see her value, and you refused. Now she's going to dismantle everything you've built, piece by piece, and you won't be able to stop her because you never bothered to learn who she really was. He gestured to his men. We're leaving. Serena will be staying at the Wellington estate until she decides what she wants to do next. As for you, he looked at Ethan with pure contempt. You'll be hearing from our lawyers, and from our bankers, and from every business partner you thought you could rely on. Veronica found her voice again, desperate and shrill. You can't do this. We have connections. We have influence. We'll fight back. Thomas laughed, a sound devoid of humor. You have nothing I can't take away. And by the time I'm done, you'll be lucky if you can afford to keep this house. He turned to Serena. Ready? Serena nodded, but before she left, she looked back at the three of them one last time. You called me nothing. You threw me away like I didn't matter. But here's the truth. I was always more than you. I just didn't need to prove it until you forced my hand. Now you're going to live with that mistake for the rest of your lives. She walked toward the Bentley, her head held high, her steps steady despite the rain. Behind her, the Whitfields stood frozen, their world crumbling around them, their arrogance replaced by the dawning realization that they'd underestimated the wrong woman. As the car doors closed and the convoy pulled away, Serena allowed herself one small, satisfied breath. This was only the beginning. The real destruction hadn't even started yet. But have you ever wondered what happens when someone who's been silenced for years finally finds their voice? The Whitfields were about to find out, and it would be more devastating than anything they could imagine. Serena had always believed that revenge was a dish best served cold, but what most people didn't understand was that coldness required heat first, an escalation so precise, so calculated, that by the time the final blow landed, it felt inevitable. The Whitfields had built their cruelty on a ladder, step by careful step, each insult worse than the last, each act of humiliation designed to break her spirit completely. They'd started small, subtle jabs at family dinners, comments about her background, reminders that she'd married up. Then came the isolation, the control over her finances. The way Veronica would invite Ethan's ex-girlfriends to parties just to watch Serena squirm. But the night they threw her out, pregnant and broken, they'd climbed to the top of that ladder and made a mistake they could never take back. They'd crossed a line so final, so irreversible, that everything before it became justification for what Serena was about to do. And the beautiful part? They'd done it to themselves. The suitcase in the rain had been the first rung, a symbolic gesture meant to strip her of dignity. Ethan had tossed it down the steps like garbage, and Vanessa had clapped, delighted by the spectacle. Look at her, Vanessa had said, pointing at Serena like she was some tragic figure in a play. Still standing there like she has options. Ethan, you really should have done this sooner. Ethan had laughed, his arm wrapped around Vanessa's waist. I know. I kept thinking she'd change, become someone worth keeping. But some people are just born mediocre. That was the second rung, the public declaration that she was replaceable, worthless, beneath them. Veronica had added to it, stepping forward with that sneer she wore like a crown. You were a mistake from the beginning, Serena. A charity case my son took pity on. But pity runs out eventually. The third rung came when Veronica leaned in close, her breath hot against Serena's face, and whispered, You were never one of us. You were just borrowing our world for a while. Now it's time to give it back. Each insult had been carefully designed to hurt, to humiliate, to break. But Serena had absorbed them all, filed them away in the mental ledger she'd been keeping for years. She'd learned early in her marriage that silence was power, that patience was a weapon sharper than any blade. While they celebrated their cruelty, she'd been watching, learning, planning. And when Veronica spat in her face, that final unforgivable act, Serena had felt the last piece of her strategy click into place. It wasn't anger she felt at that moment. It was clear, cold, precise, devastating clarity. They'd given her everything she needed to destroy them, and they didn't even know it. But here's the question that should terrify anyone who's ever underestimated someone. What happens when the person you've been tormenting has been counting every insult, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back? The phone call had been the trigger. Hello, Father, she'd said, her voice cutting through the storm with surgical precision. It's time you saw who they really are. Those words had changed everything. Ethan's smirk had faltered. Vanessa's laughter had died in her throat. Veronica's confidence had cracked like thin ice under pressure. And when Thomas Wellington arrived 10 minutes later, flanked by black SUVs and a Bentley that gleamed even in the rain, the Whitfields had finally understood what they were up against. But by then it was too late. The ladder they'd built to break Serena had become the scaffold for their own destruction. And there was no climbing back down. Thomas had stepped out of the Bentley with the kind of authority that didn't need to be announced. He was tall, composed, his suit immaculate despite the weather, his eyes cold and assessing. He'd walk toward the Whitfield slowly, deliberately, each step a countdown to their reckoning. When he reached Serena, he placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture so simple yet so powerful it made Veronica take a step back. "These are the people who thought they could humiliate my daughter," Thomas had said, his voice low, but carrying the weight of mountains. Ethan had tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. We didn't know. She never said because you never asked," Thomas interrupted, his tone sharp enough to cut. "You assumed she was nobody because she didn't flaunt her background. You mistook humility for weakness. That was your first mistake. Your last mistake was thinking you could throw her away without consequences." Veronica had tried to recover, stepping forward with her hands raised in a gesture that might have been apologetic if her eyes weren't still filled with contempt. "Mr. Wellington, I'm sure we can discuss this like reasonable adults." "Whatever Serena has told you, she told me you spat on her," Thomas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "She told me you threw her belongings into the mud. She told me your son paraded his mistress in front of her for months, humiliating her at every opportunity. Tell me, Mrs. Whitfield, which part of that requires discussion?" Veronica's mouth opened, but no words came out. Vanessa, sensing the shift in power, tried to distance herself, stepping away from Ethan like he was contaminated. "I had nothing to do with," "You laughed," Serena said, her voice calm but firm. "You stood there and laughed while they degraded me. You called me mediocre. You said I was beneath you. Don't pretend you're innocent, Vanessa. You're just as guilty as they are." Ethan finally found his voice, desperation making a crack. "Serena, please. If I'd known about your father, about your money, you would have treated me differently," Serena finished, her tone almost pitying. "That's the problem, Ethan. You only respect wealth and power. You never respected me as a person. And now that you know I have both, you think it'll change what's coming. But it won't." She turned to her father. "Show them." Thomas nodded, pulling out his phone and making a call. "It's done," he said simply, then hung up. Ethan looked confused. "What's done? What are you talking about?" Thomas smiled, but it was the smile of a predator who'd already won. As of 10 minutes ago, Wellington Industries has begun divesting from every partnership, investment, and contract tied to the Whitfield name. Your expansion deal with Dalton Industries? Cancelled. Your loan approval with First National? Denied. Your real estate acquisition in the Harbor District? The bank just pulled funding. Ethan staggered backward like he'd been physically struck. "You can't. That's impossible. We have contracts. Contracts that include clauses for withdrawal under certain conditions," Thomas said. "Conditions my legal team has been very creative in identifying." Veronica's face went white. "You're bluffing. You can't dismantle our entire business in one night." "I'm not dismantling it in one night," Thomas corrected. "I'm starting tonight. The dismantling will take weeks, maybe months. But by the time I'm finished, the Whitfield name will be a cautionary tale about what happens when arrogance outpaces competence." He turned to Serena. "Shall we go?" But Serena wasn't ready to leave yet. She had one more thing to say, one final message to deliver that would haunt the Whitfields for the rest of their lives. She stepped closer to Ethan, close enough to see the fear in his eyes, the realization that everything he'd built was crumbling. "Do you remember what you said to me on our wedding day?" she asked softly. Ethan blinked, confused. "What?" "You said you'd always protect me. You said I'd never have to worry about anything as long as I was with you. You promised me safety, security, love." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You broke every one of those promises. And now you're going to learn what it feels like to lose everything." Vanessa tried one last time to salvage the situation, her voice shrill and desperate. "Serena, you're being dramatic. So we said some things we didn't mean. People fight. People say cruel things. That doesn't mean you have to destroy us." Serena looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment there was something almost like pity in her eyes. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about what you said. It's about what you did. You didn't just insult me. You tried to erase me. You tried to make me believe I was nothing so you could feel like you were something. But the truth is, I was always more than you. I just didn't need to prove it until you forced my hand." She turned back to her father. "I'm ready now." Thomas nodded, gesturing to his men. They formed a protective circle around Serena as she walked toward the Bentley. Her head held high, her steps steady despite the rain that still poured from the sky. Behind her, the Whitfields stood frozen, their world collapsing in real time, their arrogance replaced by the crushing weight of their own mistakes. As Serena settled into the back seat of the Bentley, she allowed herself one last look at the mansion she'd called home for 5 years. It looked smaller now, less intimidating, like a stage set that had lost its magic once the lights came up. The Whitfields were still standing in the doorway, Ethan's face pale, Veronica's expression shattered, Vanessa's confidence completely gone. They looked like ghosts, haunting a house that no longer belonged to them. Thomas climbed into the seat beside Serena, signaling the driver to move. As the convoy pulled away, the estate disappearing into the rain behind them, he turned to his daughter. "Are you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back." Serena's expression was calm, resolved. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. They built a ladder to break me, but all they did was give me the perfect blueprint for their destruction. Every insult, every act of cruelty, every moment they thought they were winning, it was all just ammunition I was storing for this moment." Thomas smiled, genuine pride in his eyes. "Your mother would be proud. She always said patience was the most dangerous weapon." "She was right," Serena said. "And now the Whitfields are going to learn just how dangerous it can be." The Bentley disappeared into the night, leaving the Whitfield estate behind. But the storm Serena had unleashed was just beginning, and by the time it was over, the family that had tried to erase her would be nothing but a memory, a cautionary tale about the cost of underestimating the quiet ones. Because isn't it always the people you dismiss who end up holding all the cards? The phone call had been deceptively simple. 9 words that changed everything. "Hello, Father. It's time you saw who they really are." Those words had activated a series of events that would unravel the Whitfields' carefully constructed world thread by thread, until nothing remained but the truth they'd spent years trying to hide. But what made Serena's strategy so devastating wasn't just the call itself. It was everything that came before it. The years of silent preparation, the networks she'd built in secret, the allies she'd cultivated while her enemies celebrated their own cruelty. Thomas Wellington hadn't just arrived with cars and authority. He'd arrived with an arsenal so vast, so deeply embedded in the systems the Whitfields relied on, that by the time they realized what was happening, it would already be too late to stop it. The Wellington estate sat on 40 acres of pristine land, a world away from the cold marble halls of the Whitfield mansion. Serena had been back for 3 days now, resting, recovering, letting her father's team handle the initial strikes, while she planned the next phase. She sat in the study, her hand resting on her belly, watching through the window as rain continued to fall. Thomas entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea, setting one in front of her before taking the seat across the desk. "The first wave has hit," he said, his voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of satisfaction. Dalton Industries pulled out of the expansion deal. First National denied the loan extension. The Harbor District acquisition collapsed when the investors withdrew. Serena took a sip of tea, her expression unchanged. "And the Whitfields?" "Scrambling," Thomas replied. "Ethan's been on the phone for hours trying to understand what's happening. Veronica's calling in every favor she has left. They think it's a coincidence. They don't see the pattern yet." Serena smiled faintly. "They will. Eventually. But by then, it'll be too late." Thomas leaned back, studying his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "Your mother set this up years ago, you know. The trusts, the shell corporations, the investment networks. She always knew you'd need protection from people like them." Serena's eyes softened at the mention of her mother. "She told me once that power wasn't about being loud. It was about being invisible until the moment you chose to be seen." "She was right," Thomas said. "And she made sure you'd have the resources to disappear or destroy, depending on what you needed. $50 million in liquid assets, another $30 in investments and properties. But more than that, she gave you access, connections to banks, corporate boards, charity organizations, political networks. Every system the Whitfields think they control, your mother made sure you had a backdoor into it. Serena set down her tea, her fingers drumming lightly on the desk. I've been activating those connections for the past 6 months. Every time Ethan humiliated me, every time Veronica reminded me I was beneath them, I was quietly reaching out to the people they'd overlooked. The contractors they underpaid. The business partners they'd betrayed. The staff they'd mistreated. Everyone has a story about the Whitfields, and everyone was willing to help when I offered them a better option. Thomas nodded. The beauty of your strategy is that it's invisible. They're watching their empire collapse, but they can't see your hand in it. To them, it looks like bad luck, bad timing, the natural consequences of poor decisions. Exactly, Serena said. I learned that from watching them. They broke me down slowly, piece by piece, so I'd never see the full picture of what they were doing. Now I'm doing the same to them, but with one difference. I know exactly what I'm doing, and they have no idea what's coming next. She paused, her expression hardening. But I need to accelerate the timeline. The baby's coming in 3 months, and I want this finished before then. I want my child born into a world where the Whitfields are nothing but a cautionary tale. Thomas pulled out his phone, scrolling through a list of names and numbers. What's the next target? Serena's smile was cold. Vanessa's family. They're the financial backbone keeping Ethan afloat right now. If we cut them off, the Whitfields won't last another month. That's when the second twist emerged, the one no one saw coming. Thomas made a call, and within minutes, a man appeared at the study door. He was tall, lean, with the kind of face that looked perpetually tired but sharp. Marcus Hartwell, Vanessa's estranged brother. Serena had reached out to him 3 months ago through a mutual contact, and what she discovered had been better than she could have hoped. Marcus had spent years watching his sister manipulate their parents, steal his inheritance, and push him out of the family business. He'd been angry, bitter, desperate for a way to take back what was his. And Serena had offered him exactly that. Marcus, Serena said, gesturing for him to sit. Thank you for coming. Marcus nodded, his expression guarded but curious. You said you had news. I do, Serena replied. The first phase is complete. The Whitfields are starting to feel the pressure. Now it's time to move on your sister's family. Are you ready? Marcus leaned forward, his eyes hard. I've been ready for years. What do you need? Serena slid a folder across the desk. Inside are the financial records you gave me. Proof of how your sister embezzled funds from your family's company. How she manipulated the board to vote you out. How she's been siphoning money into offshore accounts for the past 5 years. I've had my lawyers review everything, and it's airtight. Marcus opened the folder, scanning the documents, his jaw tightening with every page. This could destroy her. It will destroy her, Serena corrected. But more than that, it'll destroy the financial support Ethan's been relying on. Without Vanessa's family money, the Whitfields can't cover their debts. Their empire collapses. Marcus looked up, something like awe in his eyes. You've been planning this for months. Years, Serena said quietly. I've been planning this for years. Every insult, every act of cruelty, every moment they thought they were winning. I was storing it all, waiting for the right moment. And now that moment is here. Thomas interjected. Marcus, once we release these documents, there's no going back. Your sister will know you betrayed her. Your family will fracture. Are you prepared for that? Marcus didn't hesitate. She betrayed me first. She stole my inheritance, my future, everything my parents built for me. She deserves this. Serena nodded. Then we agreed. Release the documents to the financial press, the board of directors, and the SEC. Let them do the rest. As Marcus left with the folder, Thomas turned to Serena. You've built something extraordinary here. A network of allies, each with their own reasons to see the Whitfields fall. It's not just about money or power. It's about justice. It's about consequences, Serena corrected. The Whitfields spent years avoiding them. They hurt people, broke promises, destroyed lives, and never once faced the fallout. I'm just making sure the universe corrects itself. Thomas smiled. Your mother would say the same thing. Serena's expression softened again, just for a moment. I wish she were here to see this. She is, Thomas said. In every move you make, every strategy you execute. She's here. Back at the Whitfield estate, chaos was unfolding in real time. Ethan paced the living room, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice rising with frustration. What do you mean the loan was denied? We've been banking with you for 20 years. On the other end, the bank representative's voice was apologetic but firm. I'm sorry, Mr. Whitfield, but the decision came from higher up. There were concerns about your financial stability. Ethan hung up, slamming the phone onto the table. Veronica sat on the couch, her face pale, her hands trembling. This doesn't make sense. 3 deals in 3 days? That's not a coincidence. Someone's targeting us. Vanessa entered the room, her expression panicked. Ethan, I just got off the phone with my father. He's furious. Someone leaked documents to the board, documents about me, about the family finances. They're calling for an emergency meeting. They're talking about removing me from the company. Ethan turned to her, his eyes wild. What documents? What were they talking about? Vanessa's voice broke. I don't know. But they mentioned fraud, embezzlement. Ethan, this is serious. If they find proof, I could go to jail. Veronica stood abruptly, her composure finally shattering. This is Serena. It has to be. She's doing this. Ethan shook his head. That's impossible. Serena doesn't have the resources or the connections to pull something like this off. She's nobody. She's Thomas Wellington's daughter, Veronica snapped. How much more proof do you need? We threw her out, and now everything's falling apart. It's not a coincidence, Ethan. It's revenge. Ethan sank into a chair, his head in his hands. What do we do? Veronica's voice was cold, calculated. We fight back. We call our lawyers, our accountants, everyone we know. We find out who's behind this, and we destroy them before they destroy us. But even as she spoke, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered the truth she didn't want to admit. It was already too late. Serena had spent years preparing for this moment, and they'd given her all the ammunition she needed. The Whitfields were playing a game they didn't even know had started, and by the time they figured out the rules, they'd already lost. Serena stood at the window of the Wellington estate, watching the rain fall, her hand resting protectively on her belly. She thought about the baby growing inside her, the life she'd created even as her own life fell apart. This child would never know the Whitfields' cruelty. They'd never feel small or worthless or beneath anyone. They'd grow up knowing their mother was strong, patient, and unbreakable. And they'd learn that power wasn't about being loud or cruel. It was about being smart, strategic, and willing to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Serena had waited 5 years. She'd endured humiliation, betrayal, and pain. But now, as the Whitfields scrambled to understand what was happening, as their empire crumbled around them, she finally allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not for revenge, but for justice. Not for destruction, but for balance. The universe was correcting itself, one collapsed deal at a time, and Serena was simply the instrument through which it worked. Have you ever watched someone who underestimated you realize their mistake too late? The Whitfields were about to learn that lesson, and it would cost them everything. The storm had been raging for hours, but it felt like it had been going on for years, a physical manifestation of everything Serena had endured in silence. She stood outside the Whitfield estate 1 week after that first devastating night, but this time she wasn't alone, wasn't vulnerable, wasn't the woman they'd thrown into the rain like garbage. This time, she returned with an army. The black SUVs rolled through the gates in perfect formation, their headlights cutting through the darkness like judgment itself. 1, 2, 3 vehicles, followed by the Bentley that gleamed even under the storm clouds, its presence commanding attention without effort. Inside the mansion, Ethan stood at the window, his face draining of color as he watched the convoy approach. Veronica appeared beside him, her confidence from a week ago completely evaporated, replaced by something that looked dangerously close to fear. Vanessa stood further back, her arms wrapped around herself, her earlier arrogance reduced to trembling uncertainty. They'd spent the past 7 days watching their world collapse in slow motion. Deals falling through, partnerships dissolving, bank accounts mysteriously frozen at critical moments. And now, as those cars pulled up to their door, they finally understood what they were facing. Thomas Wellington stepped out of the Bentley first, his movements deliberate and controlled. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the weather, his posture radiating the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself. Behind him, his security team emerged from the SUVs, forming a protective barrier that was both professional and intimidating. And then came Serena. She moved slowly, carefully, one hand supporting her pregnant belly, the other holding her father's arm. But there was nothing weak about her now. Her posture was straight, her head held high, her expression calm and resolved. She wore a simple black dress that somehow looked more elegant than anything Vanessa had ever owned. And her eyes, those eyes that had once absorbed every insult in silence, now burned with quiet power. The Whitfield stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything but watch as the woman they destroyed walked back into their lives with the force of a hurricane. Thomas stopped at the bottom of the steps, his gaze sweeping over Ethan, Veronica, and Vanessa with the kind of assessment a surgeon might give before making the first cut. "Mr. Whitfield," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the rain. "Mrs. Whitfield. Miss Hartwell. I believe we have some unfinished business." Ethan tried to summon the bravado he'd worn so easily a week ago, but it came out hollow. "Mr. Wellington, I think there's been a misunderstanding. You never intended to humiliate my daughter." Thomas interrupted, his tone sharp enough to cut through steel. "You never intended to throw her out while she was 6 months pregnant with your child? You never intended to have your mother spit in her face?" Each word landed like a physical blow, and Ethan staggered under the weight of them. Veronica stepped forward, trying to regain some semblance of control. "We were having a private family matter. Serena was your victim," Thomas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And you made the mistake of thinking she'd stay that way." Serena stepped forward now, releasing her father's arm, standing on her own. She looked at each of them in turn: Ethan, who'd promised to love and protect her; Veronica, who'd spent 5 years reminding her she wasn't good enough; Vanessa, who'd laughed as they destroyed her. "You asked me once what I was waiting for," Serena said, her voice steady and clear. "I was waiting for this moment. The moment when you'd realize that every insult, every act of cruelty, every time you made me feel small, it was all building to this." Ethan's hands trembled. "Serena, please. We can talk about this. We can fix what?" Serena interrupted. "Your character? Your conscience? Your complete inability to see people as anything other than tools for your own advancement." She took another step closer, and despite being pregnant and smaller than all of them, she somehow seemed to tower over them. "You can't fix what's already broken, Ethan. And you've been broken for a long time." Vanessa found her voice, though it came out shaky and desperate. "What do you want from us? Money? An apology? Just tell us what you want." Serena's expression didn't change. "I don't want anything from you, Vanessa. You have nothing I need. I just want you to understand what's happening." She paused, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. "For the past week, you've been watching your world fall apart. Deals collapsing, partnerships ending, money disappearing. You've been scrambling to understand why, calling in favors, hiring investigators, trying to find the pattern. And now I'm here to tell you, there is no pattern. There's just me." Veronica's voice was sharp, defensive. "You're one woman. You can't possibly." "I'm not one woman," Serena corrected. "I'm one woman with $50 million, extensive financial networks, political connections, and a list of people you've wronged who were more than happy to help me take you down. I'm one woman who spent 5 years watching you, learning how your business works, identifying every weakness, every vulnerability, every pressure point. And now I'm applying that pressure systematically and without mercy." Thomas stepped forward again, his presence amplifying Serena's words. Let me be clear about what's happening here. Wellington Industries has divested from every partnership connected to the Whitfield name. Every bank, every investor, every corporate board we have influence over has been advised to reconsider their relationship with your family. Your expansion into the Harbor District? Dead. Your loans with First National? Denied. Your partnership with Dalton Industries? Terminated. He paused, letting each word sink in like a knife. And that's just the beginning. Ethan's legs gave out, and he sank onto the steps, his head in his hands. You're destroying us. No, Thomas corrected. You destroyed yourselves. We're just making sure everyone else sees what you really are. Veronica tried one last time to fight back, her voice rising with desperation. We'll sue you. We'll fight this. We have lawyers, we have connections. You had connections, Serena interrupted. Past tense. Do you want to know how many of your so-called friends have returned your calls this week? How many business partners have stood by you? How many people rushed to your defense when your empire started crumbling? She let the silence answer for her. None of them. Because loyalty built on fear, and money disappears the moment the money does. Vanessa was crying now, mascara running down her face, her earlier beauty replaced by raw panic. My family, the documents Marcus leaked, they're going to destroy me. I could go to prison. Serena looked at her without pity. You should have thought about that before you embezzled from your own family. You should have thought about the consequences before you laughed while they threw me into the rain. You should have thought about a lot of things, Vanessa. But you didn't. Because people like you never think you'll have to pay for what you do. Thomas gestured to his security team, who began moving back toward the vehicles. We're done here. Serena has said what she came to say. The rest will unfold on its own. But Serena held up a hand, stopping them. Actually, there's one more thing. She turned to Ethan, who looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. You told me on our wedding day that I'd never have to worry about anything as long as I was with you. You promised me safety, security, love. You broke every promise, Ethan. Every single one. And now you're sitting here, broken and desperate, and you want me to fix it. You want me to show mercy, to forgive, to make this all go away. She crouched down so they were eye level, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But here's the truth. I don't owe you anything. Not my forgiveness, not my mercy, not my help. You threw those things away when you threw me away. And now you're going to live with that choice for the rest of your life. Ethan reached out, grabbing her hand. Please. The baby. Think about our baby. Serena pulled her hand away gently but firmly. I am thinking about the baby. That's why I'm doing this. My child will grow up knowing their mother didn't let anyone break her. They'll know that strength isn't loud or violent. It's patient and precise. They'll know that actions have consequences, and that people who hurt others eventually face judgment. She stood, placing her hand on her belly. And they'll never know you, because you don't deserve to be part of their life. The finality in her voice was absolute, and Ethan crumbled completely, his shoulders shaking with sobs. Veronica stood frozen, her face pale, all her earlier arrogance stripped away. Vanessa had collapsed onto the steps, her world ending in real time. And Serena, standing in the rain with her father beside her, felt nothing but cold, clear resolution. She'd endured years of cruelty for this moment, and now that it was here, she refused to feel guilty for what she'd done. Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder. Ready. Serena nodded. Ready. As they walked back toward the Bentley, Veronica found her voice one last time, shrill and desperate. You were nothing. You'll always be nothing. Serena stopped, turning back with an expression that was almost pitiful. If I was nothing, Veronica, then what does that make you? Because I destroyed your entire empire without raising my voice once. I dismantled everything you built just by being patient and strategic. So if I'm nothing, what does that say about you? She didn't wait for an answer. She simply turned and walked away, leaving the Whitfield standing in the rain, their empire crumbling, their arrogance shattered, their future uncertain. The convoy pulled away from the estate, and as the mansion disappeared behind them, Serena allowed herself one small, satisfied breath. The moral universe had corrected itself, and she'd been the instrument through which it worked. The Whitfields had built their power on cruelty and arrogance, and now that foundation was crumbling beneath them. And the woman they'd thrown away like garbage was now untouchable, unstoppable, and completely at peace with what she'd done. Because isn't it always the quiet ones who end up having the last word? The Whitfields woke up the next morning to a nightmare that refused to end. Ethan's phone buzzed at 6 a.m. with an email from their primary contractor, a company they'd worked with for 15 years, stating that due to unforeseen circumstances, they were terminating all active projects effective immediately. By 7 a.m., their accountant called in a panic, informing them that 3 separate vendor accounts had been frozen pending investigation into financial irregularities. By 8 a.m., the business press had picked up a story about the Whitfield empire's sudden instability, complete with anonymous quotes from industry insiders suggesting mismanagement and ethical concerns. And by 9 a.m., Ethan realized with horrifying clarity that none of this was coincidence. This was orchestration. This was Serena, dismantling their lives with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of someone who'd spent years preparing for exactly this moment. But here's the question that should terrify anyone who's ever made an enemy. How do you fight someone whose revenge is so surgical, so invisible, that by the time you see the pattern, it's already too late? Veronica sat in the study, surrounded by documents, her reading glasses perched on her nose, her face drawn with exhaustion. She'd been on the phone for hours, calling every contact she had, trying to understand what was happening. But the responses were all the same, polite deflections, vague excuses, promises to look into it that never materialized. People who'd once rushed to take her calls were now suddenly unavailable, their assistants offering carefully worded apologies about scheduling conflicts. The message was clear. The Whitfield name, once a golden ticket in their social and business circles, had become toxic overnight. Ethan paced behind her, his shirt wrinkled, his hair disheveled, looking nothing like the confident man who'd thrown his pregnant wife into the rain 2 weeks ago. This doesn't make sense, he muttered for the 100th time. These are separate companies, separate banks, separate contracts. There's no connection between them. How is she doing this? Veronica looked up from the documents, her eyes bloodshot. She's not doing it alone. Her father has networks we can't even imagine. Wellington Industries has fingers in every major financial institution, every corporate board, every regulatory body. If Thomas Wellington wants something done, it gets done. Vanessa burst through the door, her phone clutched in her hand, her face pale with panic. It's worse. My family's company just issued a statement. They're suspending me pending an internal investigation. Marcus, that bastard, he gave them everything. Bank statements, email chains, recordings of conversations where I admitted to moving funds without authorization. They're saying I embezzled over $10 million. Ethan stared at her. 10 million? Vanessa, what the hell did you do? I was protecting our interests. Vanessa shot back, her voice shrill. The money was supposed to be for us, for our future, for expanding the business after we got married. I was going to pay it back once everything was settled. Veronica stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You used embezzled money to fund our business deals? Are you insane? That ties us directly to your fraud. If they investigate you, they'll investigate us. We're exposed, Vanessa. Completely exposed. The room fell silent except for the sound of Vanessa's ragged breathing. The reality of their situation was finally sinking in. They weren't just facing financial collapse. They were facing legal consequences, public humiliation, and the complete destruction of everything they'd built over decades. Ethan's phone rang, breaking the tension. He answered it without checking the caller ID, his voice hoarse. Hello. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and devastatingly final. Mr. Whitfield, this is David Chun from Premier Real Estate Holdings. I'm calling to inform you that the sale of your Harbor District properties has been canceled. The buyer withdrew this morning, citing concerns about the viability of future development in that area. Ethan's hand tightened around the phone. What concerns? We've been planning this development for 2 years. The market research was solid. The permits were approved. The permits were revoked this morning. David interrupted. Apparently, there were environmental concerns that weren't properly addressed during the initial review. The City Planning Commission has ordered a full reassessment, which could take months, possibly years. Ethan felt the floor drop out from under him. Who filed the complaint? There was a pause. The complaint was filed by a nonprofit environmental group. Wellington Environmental Trust, I believe it was called. The line went dead. Ethan stood there, phone still pressed to his ear, his mind racing. Wellington Environmental Trust. Another piece of Thomas Wellington's empire. Another tool in Serena's arsenal. She'd found a way to tie up their most lucrative deal in bureaucratic red tape that could last indefinitely. And she'd done it so cleanly that there was no legal recourse, no way to fight back. Veronica snatched the phone from his hand. What happened? Ethan's voice was hollow. The harbor deal is dead. Serena killed it. He looked at his mother, really looked at her, and saw his own fear reflected back. She's not just attacking us financially. She's attacking us from every angle, legal, regulatory, social. She's using systems we didn't even know existed to strangle us slowly. Vanessa sank into a chair, her earlier defiance replaced by defeated acceptance. We underestimated her. We did more than that, Veronica said quietly. We gave her every reason to destroy us, and then we gave her the time and motivation to figure out exactly how to do it. She set the phone down, her hands trembling. The question now is, can we survive this? The answer, though no one wanted to say it out loud, was becoming increasingly clear. No, they couldn't. Because Serena wasn't just rich or connected or strategic. She was all three, combined with years of pent-up rage and a detailed understanding of every vulnerability the Whitfield empire had. She'd spent 5 years as an invisible observer, cataloging their mistakes, identifying their dependencies, learning the architecture of their power. And now she was methodically removing each support beam until the entire structure collapsed. Meanwhile, at the Wellington estate, Serena sat in a sunlit conservatory, reviewing reports from her team. Each document represented another small victory, another piece of the Whitfield empire crumbling exactly as planned. Marcus Hartwell's leak to the press had triggered the SEC investigation into Vanessa's embezzlement, which in turn had spooked the Whitfield family's primary investors. The environmental complaint had frozen the harbor development indefinitely, removing their largest projected revenue stream. The vendor account freezes were creating cash flow problems that would compound over the coming weeks. And the media attention, carefully orchestrated through strategic leaks to business journalists, was destroying their reputation in ways money couldn't fix. Thomas entered the conservatory carrying a tablet. The business news is running the story. Whitfield empire faces multiple crises. They're speculating about bankruptcy by the end of the quarter. Serena looked up from her reports. And the social fallout. Veronica's been dropped from 3 charity boards. Ethan's club membership is under review. Vanessa's former friends are distancing themselves publicly. Thomas set the tablet down, studying his daughter's face. How do you feel about all this? Serena was quiet for a moment, her hand resting on her belly. I feel like I'm watching karma work in real time. Every piece of cruelty they inflicted is coming back to them magnified. The humiliation, the isolation, the powerlessness, they're experiencing everything they put me through, except I'm not enjoying it the way they enjoyed hurting me. I'm just relieved. Relieved that I don't have to pretend anymore, that I don't have to make myself small to fit into their world. Thomas sat beside her. Your mother would be proud. She always said revenge was a waste of energy, but justice was worth fighting for. This isn't revenge, Serena said firmly. Revenge would be cruel for the sake of cruelty. This is accountability. They hurt people, broke laws, destroyed lives, and faced no consequences because their money and connections protected them. I'm just making sure the protection disappears so the truth can come out. She looked at her father. Is that wrong? Thomas shook his head. No, it's necessary. The world needs people like you, people who won't let the powerful get away with cruelty just because they have resources. Back at the Whitfield estate, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Their lawyer, Richard Morrison, sat across from Ethan and Veronica in the study, his expression grave. I've reviewed the documentation Marcus Hartwell provided to the SEC. It's comprehensive, detailed, and damning. Vanessa's activities constitute clear embezzlement and fraud. If this goes to trial, she's looking at 5 to 10 years in federal prison. Veronica's face went white. Can we settle? Pay restitution. Make this go away quietly. Richard shook his head. The SEC doesn't work that way, especially in high-profile cases. And with the media attention this is getting, they'll want to make an example. They'll argue that wealthy individuals can't buy their way out of consequences. Ethan stood abruptly, knocking over a glass of water. This is insane. 2 weeks ago, we were fine. 2 weeks ago, we had money, respect, and a future. How did everything fall apart so fast? Richard looked at him with something close to pity. It didn't fall apart fast, Mr. Whitfield. It fell apart slowly, over years of questionable decisions, ethical shortcuts, and treating people as disposable. Serena Wellington didn't create your problems. She just made sure everyone else finally saw them. The truth of those words hung in the air like a sentence. The Whitfields had spent years building their empire on a foundation of cruelty, manipulation, and arrogance. They'd hurt staff members who were now testifying against them in vendor disputes. They'd betrayed business partners who were now refusing to work with them. They'd made enemies of people they'd considered beneath them, and those people were now lining up to watch them fall. Serena hadn't needed to invent their sins. She just needed to shine a light on them and let nature take its course. But what makes someone's downfall truly devastating isn't the speed, it's the inevitability. The Whitfields were learning that lesson in real time, watching helplessly as every escape route closed, every ally disappeared, every hope of recovery slipped further out of reach. And the woman they'd thrown away, the woman they'd called nothing, was orchestrating it all with a calm precision that made it impossible to fight back. That evening, as the sun set over the Wellington estate, Serena stood at her bedroom window watching the sky turn orange and purple. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed, no longer the silent, submissive wife who'd absorbed cruelty without complaint, but someone who'd found her power in patience and her strength in strategy. She thought about the baby growing inside her, about the world she was creating for them. A world where actions had consequences, where cruelty couldn't hide behind wealth, where power meant responsibility instead of license. The Whitfields were falling, but Serena wasn't celebrating. She was simply witnessing justice unfold the way it always should have, methodically, comprehensively, and without mercy for those who'd shown none to others. Behind her, Thomas appeared in the doorway. The final reports are in. The Whitfields are effectively insolvent. Without the harbor deal, without their investors, without Vanessa's family money, they can't cover their operating costs for more than another month. Serena nodded slowly. And then they'll have to sell. The estate, the cars, the art collection. Everything they use to make you feel small will be auctioned off to the highest bidder. Thomas paused. Is that enough? Serena turned from the window, her expression serene. It's not enough. It's about balance. They took everything from me. My dignity, my peace, my sense of self-worth. Now the universe is taking everything from them. That's not revenge. That's equilibrium. The gala was supposed to be Ethan and Vanessa's triumph, a carefully orchestrated public spectacle designed to announce their engagement and silence the whispers about the Whitfield family's recent troubles. Veronica had insisted on it, arguing that a show of strength and confidence would reassure their remaining allies and prove they were still untouchable. The invitations had been sent 3 weeks ago to 200 of the city's most influential people, each one embossed with gold lettering and delivered by courier. The venue was the Grand Belmore Hotel, its ballroom reserved at enormous cost, with crystal chandeliers, imported flowers, and a catering menu that cost more per plate than most people earned in a week. Vanessa had commissioned a custom gown from Paris, white silk with diamonds sewn into the bodice, a dress meant to announce her arrival as the new Mrs. Whitfield. But as the evening of the gala approached, small cracks began appearing in their perfect facade. Cracks that would soon become chasms that swallowed everything whole. The first sign of trouble came 48 hours before the event when the florist called to cancel. "I'm terribly sorry, Mrs. Whitfield," the woman said, her voice apologetic but firm. "But we've had an unexpected issue with our supplier. The orchids you ordered simply aren't available." Veronica's voice was ice. "Then find different flowers. We're paying you enough to make miracles happen." "We've tried," the florist replied. "But every supplier we've contacted has either run out of inventory or raised their prices to levels that are, well, frankly unreasonable." She paused. "It's almost as if someone bought up all the premium flowers in the city." Veronica's hand tightened on the phone. "That's impossible." "I agree," the florist said. "But impossible or not, it's happening. I can offer you carnations and daisies, but carnations." Veronica's voice rose. "You expect me to decorate a gala with carnations?" The florist's silence was enough. Veronica hung up, her mind already racing. One vendor problem could be coincidence. But when the caterer called an hour later with a similar story about suddenly unavailable ingredients, and when the lighting company cited equipment failures, and when the string quartet claimed illness among their members, Veronica finally understood what was happening. Serena wasn't just attacking their business, she was attacking their dignity, their social standing, their ability to maintain the facade of power they'd built their entire lives around. Ethan stood in the study reviewing the guest list, his face growing paler with each phone call returned. Out of 200 invitations, only 43 people had confirmed attendance. The rest had sent polite regrets, citing prior commitments, family emergencies, unexpected travel, the kind of transparent excuses people make when they're too afraid to tell you the truth. The truth being that nobody wanted to be seen supporting the Whitfields while their empire was publicly collapsing. Vanessa appeared in the doorway, her phone clutched in her white-knuckled hand. The Johnsons just canceled. The Hendersons too. And the Bradfords sent a message saying they're reassessing their social calendar. Her voice cracked. "Ethan, nobody's coming. The gala is going to be empty." Ethan slammed the guest list onto the desk. "We'll cancel it. Tell everyone there's been a scheduling conflict. Postpone indefinitely. We can't cancel," Veronica interrupted, sweeping into the room with the force of a winter storm. "Do you understand what that would signal? That we're weak, that we're defeated, that Serena Wellington and her father have broken us. We're going ahead with this gala, even if only 10 people show up. We will not give them the satisfaction of seeing us retreat." But Veronica's determination couldn't change the reality unfolding around them. By the morning of the gala, the situation had deteriorated beyond salvaging. The Grand Belmore Hotel called at 9 a.m. with devastating news. Their reservation had been canceled due to a plumbing emergency that required immediate repairs. When Ethan demanded to speak to the manager, he was told the manager was unavailable and that a full refund would be processed within 10 business days. The implication was clear. Someone with enough influence had convinced the hotel that hosting the Whitfield Gala was a liability they couldn't afford. Vanessa broke down in tears, her expensive gown still hanging in its garment bag, unworn and now unnecessary. This was supposed to be perfect. This was supposed to show everyone that we're still important, that we still matter. Ethan pulled her close, but his comfort was hollow. He felt it too, the creeping realization that they'd lost control of the narrative, that their carefully constructed image was crumbling faster than they could repair it. Veronica stood at the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass, watching the rain begin to fall. "She's doing this," she said quietly. "Serena. Every vendor, every guest, every problem, it all leads back to her." The question that should terrify anyone who's ever made an enemy wasn't whether Serena was behind it. It was how she'd managed to coordinate something so comprehensive, so devastating, without leaving a single trace of her involvement. At the Wellington estate, Serena received updates throughout the day with calm satisfaction. Thomas sat beside her in the conservatory, reviewing the reports compiled by their team. The hotel was canceled citing plumbing issues. The florist couldn't secure inventory. 47% of their guest list has declined attendance. He looked up from his tablet. How did you do it? Serena smiled faintly. I didn't force anyone to do anything. I just made sure the right information reached the right people at the right time. The hotel manager learned that hosting gala for a family under SEC investigation might attract unwanted regulatory attention. The florists were offered premium prices by a shell company I control, prices the Whitfields couldn't match. And the guests? She paused. The guests were simply reminded, through carefully placed whispers and strategically leaked information, that being photographed at a Whitfield event right now might not be the best look for their own reputations. Thomas shook his head with something like awe. You didn't destroy their gala. You made it destroy itself. Exactly, Serena replied. The most effective revenge isn't loud or violent. It's making your enemy's own choices and circumstances work against them. The Whitfields built their social standing on appearances, on being seen as powerful and connected. I'm just making sure everyone sees the truth instead of the facade. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. My child will never attend a party where they have to pretend to be something they're not. They'll never have to perform for approval or hide their true self to fit in. That's worth more than any gala. Thomas reached over, squeezing her hand. Your mother would say you're learning the most important lesson, that real power doesn't need to announce itself. She'd be right, Serena said. The Whitfields announced their power at every opportunity. They wore it like armor, used it like a weapon. And now that the armor's cracking, they don't know how to function without it. By evening, the full scope of the disaster was undeniable. The Whitfields sat in their mansion, surrounded by the remnants of a gala that would never happen. Unopened champagne cases, unused decorations. Vanessa's unworn gown draped across a chair like a ghost of aspirations. The silence was suffocating, broken only by Vanessa's occasional sob and the sound of rain against the windows. Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from their publicist. Press is running the story. Whitfield Gala canceled amid financial scandal. Suggest we prepare a statement. He read the message aloud, and Veronica's face went from pale to ashen. They're making us look like failures, like frauds who couldn't even pull off a simple party. Because that's what we are now, Ethan said, his voice hollow. We become exactly what Serena wants us to be, a cautionary tale. Vanessa looked up, mascara streaking her face. How is she doing this? How is one woman with a grudge destroying everything we built? Because it wasn't a grudge, Veronica said quietly, the fight finally draining from her voice. It was justice. We hurt her, humiliated her, threw her away like she was nothing. And she spent years planning exactly how to make us pay for it. The business news picked up the story within hours, framing it not as a simple cancellation, but as evidence of the Whitfield family's declining influence. Opinion pieces appeared online speculating about their financial stability, their social connections, their future viability as a business entity. The comment sections are filled with people sharing their own stories of being mistreated by the Whitfields, former employees, dismissed contractors, vendors who'd been underpaid or stiffed entirely. Each comment was a small wound, but collectively they created a portrait of a family whose cruelty and arrogance had finally caught up with them. And through it all, Serena remained invisible. Her name appeared nowhere in the coverage. No one could directly tie her to any of the disasters befalling the Whitfields. She was a ghost in their machine, present everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, orchestrating their downfall without ever showing her hand. That invisibility made her even more terrifying, because if you can't see your enemy, how do you fight back? Veronica poured herself a drink, her hands shaking as she brought the glass to her lips. We need to reach out to Serena. Apologize. Offer restitution. Something to make this stop. Ethan laughed bitterly. You think an apology will work now? After everything we've done, everything that's happened? She doesn't want our apology, Mother. She wants our destruction. Then what do? Veronica demanded, her voice breaking. Just sit here and wait for her to finish us off. We fight, Vanessa said suddenly, standing up with renewed determination. We find her weaknesses, we hit back, we make her understand that we're not going to roll over and die just because she's throwing a tantrum. Ethan and Veronica exchanged glances. Vanessa's suggestion had merit, except for one critical problem. Serena didn't have weaknesses they could exploit. She had money they couldn't match, connections they couldn't access, and most importantly, she had the moral high ground. Every move they'd made against her had been documented, witnessed, turned into evidence of their own cruelty. Fighting back now would only make them look worse, proving Serena's point that they were exactly the monsters she'd portrayed them as. The rain continued to fall as the Whitfield family sat in their darkening mansion, the weight of their situation pressing down like physical force. The gala that was supposed to restore their image had instead highlighted their fall from grace. The social connections they'd relied on had evaporated. The business empire they'd built was crumbling. And the woman they'd called nothing was now the architect of their comprehensive destruction. Serena hadn't attended the gala because she didn't need to. Her absence was more powerful than her presence could ever be, a statement that she no longer needed to exist in their world to control it. She transcended their reach, operating from a position of strength they couldn't challenge and moral clarity they couldn't dispute. The Whitfields were learning the hardest lesson of their lives. That cruelty has consequences, arrogance has limits, and some people, when pushed too far, don't just push back. They reshape the entire battlefield until victory is inevitable. And as the evening gave way to night, as the rain turned to storm and the Whitfields sat trapped in their own gilded cage, one question remained. How do you survive when the person you destroyed comes back with the power to erase you completely? The Whitfields were about to find out that sometimes you don't. 3 weeks had passed since the gala disaster, and the Whitfield empire was now a corpse being picked apart by vultures. Bankruptcy proceedings had begun, creditors were circling, and the mansion, their symbol of untouchable wealth, was scheduled for auction within the month. Ethan had aged a decade in those 3 weeks, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow with the kind of defeat that comes from watching everything you believed about yourself proven wrong. Veronica had retreated into silence, her sharp tongue finally stilled by the weight of consequences she'd spent a lifetime avoiding. And Vanessa had disappeared entirely, fleeing to her parents' estate to avoid the SEC investigation that was closing in around her like a noose. But Serena wasn't done. There was one final act remaining, one last confrontation that would seal the Whitfields' fate forever and give her the closure she needed to move forward. The message came through their lawyer. A simple request for a meeting at the Wellington estate. All parties present, no lawyers, no intermediaries, just the people who'd caused the damage and the woman they'd damaged. Ethan had wanted to refuse, but Veronica convinced him otherwise. We have nothing left to lose, she'd said. Maybe if we face her, if we acknowledge what we did, she'll show mercy. But mercy wasn't what Serena was offering. She was offering truth, delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The Wellington estate was everything the Whitfield mansion pretended to be. Elegant without being ostentatious, powerful without being cruel. A place that felt like a home rather than a monument to ego. Ethan, Veronica, and Vanessa arrived together in a car that wasn't theirs. They'd already sold their luxury vehicles to cover debts, and were escorted through marble hallways to a sitting room where Serena waited. She sat in a high-back chair, her pregnant belly prominent now at 8 months, her posture straight and composed. Beside her sat Thomas Wellington, and standing along the walls were members of his security team, not as a threat, but as witnesses to what was about to unfold. The Whitfields entered hesitantly, their earlier confidence completely evaporated, replaced by the body language of people who'd finally realized they were outmatched. Serena gestured to the chairs across from her. Sit. It wasn't a request. They sat. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, oppressive, forcing the Whitfields to confront their own thoughts and fears without distraction. Finally, Serena broke the silence, her voice calm and measured. Do you know why I asked you here? Ethan opened his mouth, but Veronica spoke first. To gloat. To watch us beg, to enjoy the fact that you've destroyed us. Serena's expression didn't change. If I wanted to gloat, I could have done it from a distance. If I wanted you to beg, I could have arranged it in public. I asked you here because I want you to understand something. This wasn't personal revenge. This was accountability. Vanessa's voice came out sharp, defensive. You've ruined our lives over hurt feelings. How is that not revenge? Serena turned to her slowly. Hurt feelings? Is that what you think this was about? She leaned forward slightly. Vanessa, you embezzled $10 million from your own family. You laughed while they threw me out pregnant. You participated in humiliation that crossed every moral line. And you think I ruined you? You ruined yourself. I just made sure everyone else saw what you were. Ethan tried to interject. Serena, we made mistakes. We were cruel. We were thoughtless. You were calculating. Serena interrupted. Every insult was deliberate. Every act of humiliation was planned. You didn't make mistakes, Ethan. You made choices. And now you're facing the consequences of those choices. She gestured to the room around them. You called me nothing. You said I was worthless without your name, your mansion, your money. But look where we are now. I'm sitting in my family's estate, pregnant and secure, while you're bankrupt and broken. So tell me, who was really nothing? The truth of her words hit like a physical blow. Ethan's shoulders slumped. Veronica's face crumpled. Vanessa looked away, unable to meet Serena's gaze. Thomas spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment. You treated my daughter like property. You stripped her of dignity, freedom, and respect. You threw her out while she was carrying your child, and you did it with laughter and contempt. He leaned forward, his eyes cold. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? Did you think wealth and connections would protect you forever? Veronica found her voice desperate and cracking. We didn't know about her inheritance, about her family. If we'd known, you would have treated her differently, Serena finished. You've said that before. And that's exactly the problem, Veronica. You only respect money and power. You don't respect people. That's why you're here now, powerless, while I'm the one holding all the cards. She paused, letting the silence emphasize her point. But I didn't come here just to explain your failures. I came here to show you something. She nodded to Thomas, who pulled out a tablet and set it on the table between them. On the screen was a list of names, dozens of them, each one linked to a brief description. These are the people you hurt over the years, Serena explained. Former employees you fired without cause. Contractors you refused to pay. Business partners you betrayed. Staff members you humiliated. Every name represents someone who suffered because of your cruelty. She scrolled through the list slowly, letting them see the scope of their damage. I reached out to every one of these people. I asked them what you'd done, how it had affected them, whether they wanted to help hold you accountable. Do you know what I found? Not one person defended you. Not one. Ethan's face went pale. That's not fair. We've helped people too. We've donated to charity, supported causes. You donated for tax breaks and social status, Serena countered. You supported causes that made you look good. But you never actually helped anyone unless it benefited you directly. She looked at each of them in turn. That's the difference between us. I spent 5 years helping your staff, being kind to the people you overlooked, treating vendors and contractors with respect. I built relationships while you built facades. And when it came time to act, those relationships became my greatest weapon. Thomas added, every vendor who canceled on your gala, they did it because they'd been waiting years for a chance to say no to you. Every guest who declined your invitation, they did it because they were tired of pretending you were good people. Serena didn't force anyone to turn against you. She just gave them permission to act on feelings they'd been suppressing for years. Vanessa stood abruptly, her voice shrill. This is insane. You're acting like we're monsters. We're not perfect, but we're not evil. We're just people who made mistakes. Serena stood too, slowly and deliberately, her hand resting on her belly. You're right about one thing. You're not monsters. Monsters would be easier to understand. You're just people who never learned that actions have consequences, that other people's pain matters, that wealth doesn't make you immune to basic human decency. She took a step closer. You spat in my face, Vanessa. While I was pregnant with your fiancé's child, you stood there and watched his mother spit in my face, and you clapped. You thought it was entertaining. Tell me, what kind of person finds that entertaining? Vanessa's bravado crumbled, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. You didn't think I was a real person, Serena finished. You thought I was a character in your story, someone who existed to make you feel superior. But I was real. My pain was real. And now your consequences are real too. Ethan finally broke, his voice choked with emotion. What do you want from us, Serena? An apology? Restitution? Tell me what will make this right. Serena's expression softened, but only slightly. Nothing will make it right, Ethan. Some damage can't be undone. But what I want is for you to understand what you did. I want you to carry that understanding for the rest of your lives. I want you to remember that the woman you called nothing, the woman you threw away, was strong enough to dismantle everything you built without raising her voice once. She returned to her chair, settling back with visible relief. I also want you to know what happens next. The mansion will be auctioned. The proceeds will go to paying your creditors and legal fees. Vanessa will likely face prison time for embezzlement. Ethan, you'll have to find actual work, something you've never done in your privileged life. And Veronica, you'll have to live with the knowledge that your cruelty directly caused your family's destruction. Veronica's voice was barely a whisper. And you? What happened to you? Serena placed both hands on her belly. I raised my child in peace, surrounded by people who love and respect me. I use my resources to help others, to be the person you never were. And I move forward knowing that justice, real justice, eventually finds everyone. Thomas stood, signaling the meeting was over. My daughter has given you more than you deserve, an explanation, a chance to understand your mistakes, a moment to face the truth. What you do with that is up to you. He gestured to his security team. Escort them out. As the Whitfields stood to leave, Ethan turned back one last time. The baby, when it's born, can I at least know if it's healthy? Can I have that much? Serena's expression was unreadable. You lost the right to ask about this child when you threw me into the rain. You wanted to be free of me, free of this responsibility. Congratulations, Ethan. You got exactly what you wanted. The finality in her voice left no room for argument. The security team escorted the Whitfields through the halls and back to their borrowed car, leaving them to face the ruins of their empire alone. Inside the sitting room, Serena exhaled slowly, the tension draining from her body. Thomas sat beside her. How do you feel? Tired, Serena admitted. But lighter. Like I've been carrying something heavy for years and finally set it down. That's what justice does, Thomas said. It doesn't just punish the guilty. It frees the innocent from the weight of their pain. Serena looked out the window at the manicured gardens, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the lawn. Do you think they'll change? Do you think they'll learn anything from this? Thomas was quiet for a moment. Some people change when they face consequences. Others just become bitter. But that's not your concern anymore. You've done what needed to be done. What they do with it is their choice. Serena nodded, feeling the baby kick against her hand. She thought about the future, about raising a child who would never know the Whitfields' cruelty, who would grow up understanding that strength came from character rather than cruelty, that power was a responsibility rather than a license. The confrontation was over, but the story wasn't finished yet. There was still one final chapter to write, one last act that would close this painful period of her life forever. But for now, in this moment, Serena allowed herself to simply breathe, to feel the weight of victory mixed with the exhaustion of battle, to understand that sometimes the hardest part of justice isn't the planning or the execution. It's living with what comes after. Because when you've spent years fighting to hold someone accountable, what do you do when the fight is finally over? The confrontation had ended, but Serena wasn't finished. There was one final truth that needed to be spoken, one last message that would define everything that had happened and everything that would come after. She'd asked the Whitfields to return the following morning, alone this time, no lawyers, no advisors, just the three people who destroyed her life standing before the woman they'd underestimated. They arrived at dawn, haggard and exhausted, looking like ghosts of the confident, cruel people they'd been just months ago. The sitting room was different this time. No security team lining the walls. No Thomas Wellington providing backup. Just Serena, 9 months pregnant now, sitting in that same high-back chair with a calm that seemed almost supernatural. The morning light streaming through the windows illuminated her face, and for the first time, the Whitfields saw her not as the woman they'd victimized, but as the force of nature she'd become. "Sit," Serena said, and they obeyed without argument. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that resistance wasn't even a consideration anymore. Serena studied them for a long moment, taking in every detail of their defeat. Ethan's expensive suit was wrinkled, probably slept in. Veronica's perfectly styled hair was now streaked with gray she'd stopped bothering to dye. Vanessa's face was bare of makeup, stripped of the artificial confidence cosmetics had provided. They looked human for the first time, vulnerable, breakable, real. "I've been thinking about what to say to you," Serena began, her voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "I've rehearsed speeches in my head, imagining this moment 1,000 different ways. But now that you're here, I realize there's only one thing that really matters." She leaned forward slightly, her hands resting on her belly. "You mistook my patience for permission. You mistook my kindness for weakness. And now you will live with that mistake for the rest of your lives." The words hung in the air like a verdict handed down by a judge who'd seen all the evidence and found the defendants wanting. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but Serena raised a hand, silencing him. "I'm not finished." She stood slowly, her pregnancy making the movement deliberate, and walked to the window overlooking the gardens. "Do you know what the hardest part of the past 5 years was? It wasn't the insults. It wasn't the humiliation. It wasn't even being thrown out pregnant." She turned back to face them. "It was watching you enjoy it. Every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every moment you made me feel small. You savored it. You fed on my pain like it was nourishment for your egos." Veronica's voice was hoarse. "We didn't. You did," Serena interrupted firmly. "Don't insult me by lying now. I watched your faces. I saw the pleasure you took in breaking me down. Veronica, you smiled every time you reminded me I wasn't good enough. Ethan, you laughed when you told your friends I was boring and mediocre. And Vanessa, you practically glowed when they threw my suitcase into the rain." She walked back toward them, her footsteps measured and deliberate. "That's what makes you irredeemable. Not that you were cruel, but that you enjoyed being cruel. Not that you hurt me, but that my pain brought you joy." Ethan finally found words, his voice breaking. "I was wrong. God, Serena, I was so wrong. I loved you once, I swear I did, but somewhere along the way, I forgot what that meant. I let my mother poison my mind. I let Vanessa's ambition corrupt my judgment. I let my own arrogance convince me you were disposable." Tears streamed down his face. "But you weren't disposable. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw it away because I was too stupid and too proud to see it." Serena's expression didn't soften. "You loved the idea of me, Ethan. You loved having someone you could control, someone who made you feel superior. But you never loved me, the real me, with thoughts and feelings and worth beyond what I could provide to your ego. And that's why we're here now." She sat back down, the physical effort of standing clearly taxing her. "I want you to understand something critical. Every person you hurt over the years, every staff member you fired unjustly, every contractor you underpaid, every business partner you betrayed, they all had families, dreams, futures that you damaged without a second thought. You never considered their pain because you never saw them as real people. They were just obstacles or tools, depending on what you needed at the moment." Vanessa spoke up, her voice small and defeated. "What do you want us to say? That we're monsters? That we deserve everything that's happened? Fine. We're monsters. We deserve this. Does that make you feel better?" Serena's laugh was short and humorless. "This isn't about making me feel better, Vanessa. This is about making sure you understand the scope of your damage. Because here's what's going to happen next." She pulled out a folder from beside her chair and set it on the table between them. Inside this folder are legal documents transferring ownership of certain assets. Assets that will ensure the people you hurt get compensation. Former employees will receive severance they were owed. Contractors will be paid for work you refused to honor. Business partners you cheated will get restitution. Ethan stared at the folder. We don't have those kinds of resources anymore. Everything's gone. I know, Serena said. That's why I'm providing the resources. I'm using my inheritance to pay your debts to the people who actually deserved your money in the first place. Veronica's eyes widened. You're using your money to pay our debts? Why? Serena's expression was steel. Because this isn't about revenge. It never was. This is about justice. And justice means making things right for everyone you hurt, not just me. You don't deserve my mercy, but they deserve compensation. She tapped the folder. You'll sign these documents transferring any remaining assets you have to a trust I've established. That trust will distribute funds to your victims according to the damage you caused them. You'll have nothing left, but at least the people you hurt will have something. The magnitude of what she was proposing settled over the room like a weight. The Whitfields would lose everything, not to line Serena's pockets, but to pay for sins they'd committed against people they'd long forgotten. Thomas entered the room quietly, carrying additional documents. There's one more element, he said, his voice grave. As part of this agreement, you'll provide written testimony admitting to your unethical business practices, your mistreatment of employees, and your history of exploitation. This testimony will be filed with the appropriate authorities and made available to anyone considering doing business with you in the future. Ethan's face went pale. That's destroying any chance we have of rebuilding. Nobody will ever work with us again. Exactly, Serena said. You built your empire on lies, manipulation, and cruelty. I'm making sure everyone knows the truth so you can never build that kind of empire again. She leaned back, her hands resting on her belly. You'll have to earn trust the way normal people do, slowly, through consistent ethical behavior over years. You'll have to work actual jobs, live within actual means, treat people with actual respect. Everything you should have been doing all along. Veronica's composure finally shattered completely. You're not just punishing us. You're remaking us. You're forcing us to become different people. I'm forcing you to become honest people, Serena corrected. Whether you become better people is up to you. The distinction was crucial, and the Whitfields felt it like a blade. They could sign the documents, admit their failures, and start over with nothing, or they could refuse and face criminal prosecution for Vanessa's embezzlement, civil suits from the people they cheated, and public exposure that would make their current humiliation look gentle by comparison. Ethan picked up the pen, his hand shaking. If I sign this, if we do everything you're asking, what happens to the baby? Do I ever get to know my child? Serena was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving in slow circles over her belly. The baby is not a bargaining chip, Ethan. You don't get access to my child by fulfilling minimum requirements of human decency. You get access by proving over years that you're capable of being the kind of father a child deserves. Patient, kind, selfless, emotionally stable. Right now, you're none of those things. Her words were harsh, but not cruel. Factual rather than vindictive. Maybe someday, when you rebuilt your character the way you'll need to rebuild your life, we can revisit this conversation. But that day is years away, and it'll only come if you actually change. Ethan's shoulders shook with silent sobs, but he signed the documents. Veronica signed next, her hand steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Vanessa signed last, her signature barely legible through her trembling. As Thomas collected the documents, Serena spoke one final time. I want you to know something. I don't forgive you. I may never forgive you. But I'm letting you go, not for your sake, but for mine. I'm closing this chapter of my life so I can open the next one. She stood again, walking to the door and opening it. My child deserves a mother who's not consumed by anger and revenge. They deserve to grow up in a home filled with love and peace, not bitterness and pain. So I'm choosing to move forward, to focus on building a good life rather than punishing your bad one. The Whitfields stood slowly, understanding that this was their dismissal. As they walked toward the door, Veronica stopped in front of Serena. "I need you to know something too. We thought we were teaching you your place, but you taught us ours. And I hate that the lesson came too late." Serena met her gaze without flinching. Sometimes the best lessons are the ones that hurt the most. I hope you learn from this one. The Whitfields left the Wellington estate for the last time, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs and the weight of their mistakes. Behind them, Serena stood in the doorway, one hand on her belly, watching them disappear down the drive. Thomas appeared beside her. "Are you sure about this? About using your money to pay their debts?" Serena nodded. "The people they hurt didn't choose to be their victims. I did choose to take them down. That means I have a responsibility to make sure innocent people don't suffer in the process. That's what separates justice from revenge. Justice considers everyone affected, not just the people who deserve punishment." Thomas smiled, genuine pride in his eyes. "Your mother would be so proud of who you've become." "I hope so," Serena said softly. "I hope she's watching and knows that her daughter didn't just survive cruelty. She transformed it into something meaningful." She turned from the door, walking back into the mansion that was now truly her home. The confrontation was over. The verbal execution is complete. The moral clarity established beyond any doubt. The Whitfields would spend the rest of their lives carrying the weight of what they'd done, and Serena would spend hers building something beautiful from the ashes of what they tried to destroy. In the end, that was the real victory, not that she'd brought them down, but that she'd risen above everything they tried to make her believe about herself. She was a nothing. She'd never been nothing. And now, finally, everyone knows it. But here's the question that matters most. When someone tries to break you and fails, when you rise from the ashes stronger than before, what do you build with that strength? Serena was about to show the world exactly what justice, tempered with wisdom and executed with precision, could create. And it would be extraordinary. 6 months had passed since that final confrontation, and the world had shifted on its axis in ways both visible and invisible. The Whitfield mansion had been auctioned off to a tech entrepreneur who planned to convert it into a wellness center, a fitting end for a place that had housed so much toxicity. The proceeds, as promised, went directly into the trust Serena had established, compensating former employees, contractors, and business partners who'd suffered under the Whitfield's reign. Ethan now worked as a junior analyst at a mid-sized firm, earning a fraction of what he'd once spent on a single dinner. Veronica had moved to a modest apartment across the city, her social calendar empty, her charity board positions revoked, her influence reduced to nothing. And Vanessa was serving 18 months in a minimum security facility for embezzlement, her designer wardrobe replaced by prison uniforms, her arrogance replaced by the harsh reality of consequences she could no longer buy her way out of. The mighty had fallen, and the world had barely noticed, because in the end, they'd never been as important as they believed. Serena sat in the nursery of the Wellington estate, holding her 3-month-old daughter, Emma Catherine Wellington. The baby had her mother's dark eyes and her grandfather's strong features, and when she looked up at Serena with that innocent, trusting gaze, it felt like redemption made flesh. Everything Serena had endured, every moment of pain and humiliation, had led to this, a child born into safety, surrounded by love, completely untouched by the cruelty that had defined her mother's marriage. Thomas entered quietly, carrying a cup of tea, and wearing the soft smile he reserved for his granddaughter. "She's perfect," he said, sitting beside them. "Just like her mother." Serena laughed softly. "I'm far from perfect, Dad. I spent months orchestrating the destruction of my ex-husband's family. That's not exactly saintly behavior." "No," Thomas agreed. "But it was necessary behavior. There's a difference between cruelty and accountability. You didn't hurt them for pleasure. You held them responsible for their actions. That's not only acceptable, it's admirable." Emma made a small sound, and Serena adjusted her position, marveling at how something so tiny could feel so substantial. "I got a letter yesterday," she said. "From Ethan." Thomas's expression hardened. "What did it say?" He apologized. Again. He said he's been in therapy, working on understanding what he did wrong, why he became the person he became. He said he doesn't expect forgiveness, but he wanted me to know he's trying to change. Serena looked down at Emma. He asked if he could at least see a picture of her. Just one picture, so he knows she's healthy and happy. Thomas was quiet for a moment. What did you tell him? Nothing yet, Serena admitted. Part of me wants to send him away forever, to make sure he never has any connection to Emma. But another part wonders if complete exclusion is the right choice. He is her biological father, even if he doesn't deserve the title. She sighed. I don't know what the right answer is. Thomas reached over, gently touching Emma's tiny hand. The right answer is whatever protects this child and gives you peace. If that means Ethan sees a picture, fine. If it means he never knows anything about her, that's fine too. You've earned the right to make that choice without guilt. Serena nodded slowly. I think I'll send him one picture. Not as a gift, but as a reminder. A reminder of what he lost, what he threw away, what he can never get back. She looked at her father. He wanted to be free of me, free of this responsibility. I'm going to show him exactly what freedom cost him. Thomas smiled grimly. Your mother would approve of that choice. Mercy with consequences. Kindness with boundaries. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Thomas's assistant entered with a tablet. Sir, the final disbursement reports from the trust are ready for review. Thomas took the tablet, scrolling through the data. Every person on the list has been compensated. Former employees received their owed severance plus interest. Contractors were paid in full for incomplete projects. Business partners received restitution for losses incurred through the Whitfield's unethical practices. He looked up at Serena. You spent nearly $15 million making their victims whole. Serena didn't flinch at the number. It was the right thing to do. Those people suffered because of the Whitfield's cruelty. I wasn't going to let them continue suffering just to punish Ethan and his family more. The assistant continued. There's also been significant media coverage. Several business publications have run profiles on how the Whitfield empire collapsed, using it as a case study in corporate ethics and personal accountability. Your role has been mentioned, though you've remained anonymous as requested. Thomas dismissed the assistant and turned to Serena. You could come forward, you know. Take credit for what you've accomplished. Become a symbol of how victims can reclaim their power. Serena shook her head. That's not what this was about. I didn't do this to become famous or inspirational. I did it because they needed to face consequences, and I was in a position to make that happen. The satisfaction isn't in public recognition. It's in knowing that justice was served and innocent people were helped. Emma stirred in her arms, and Serena began to rock gently. Besides, I don't want Emma growing up as the daughter of the woman who destroyed the Whitfields. I want her to grow up as Emma Wellington, beloved granddaughter of Thomas Wellington, with her own identity and her own story. As if on cue, Emma opened her eyes fully, looking up at Serena with that penetrating infant gaze that seemed to see everything and understand nothing. Serena felt her heart swell with a love so profound it was almost painful. This was what the Whitfields had tried to destroy, not just her dignity or her peace, but her future, her capacity to love and be loved, her chance at building something beautiful. They'd failed. Not only had they failed to break her, but their cruelty had forged her into something stronger, sharper, more capable than she'd ever been before. The irony wasn't lost on her. By trying to destroy her, they'd created the instrument of their own destruction. But would they ever understand that? Would they ever truly grasp that their downfall was self-inflicted? That every cruel word and dismissive gesture had been building toward their inevitable collapse? Thomas seemed to read her thoughts. I spoke with my contacts yesterday. Ethan is apparently doing better than expected. Working hard, keeping his head down, actually learning what it means to earn respect rather than demand it. Veronica has started volunteering at a women's shelter, of all things. And Vanessa is taking college courses in prison, studying social work. Serena raised an eyebrow. Social work? Vanessa? People change when they hit rock bottom, Thomas said. Sometimes they become bitter. Sometimes they find redemption. We'll see which path they choose. Serena thought about that for a moment. I don't need them to find redemption. I don't need them to become better people. But if they do, if they actually learn from what happened, then maybe all of this served a larger purpose than just holding them accountable. She looked out the window at the gardens, where spring flowers were beginning to bloom. Maybe their story becomes a cautionary tale that prevents someone else from making the same mistakes. Thomas stood, preparing to leave mother and daughter to their quiet moment. You've done something remarkable, Serena. Not just surviving what they did to you, but using it to create positive change. The people you've helped, the accountability you've enforced, the example you've set, that's a legacy worth more than any amount of money. Thank you, Dad, Serena said softly, for believing in me, for giving me the resources to fight back, for being the father Ethan will never be to Emma. After Thomas left, Serena sat alone with her daughter, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, casting everything in golden light. She thought about the past year, the humiliation, the planning, the execution, the confrontation, and finally, the closure. Every step had been necessary, every action calculated, every consequence earned. The Whitfields had spent 5 years teaching her that she was nothing, and she'd spent months proving them catastrophically wrong. But the real victory wasn't in their downfall. It was in this moment, holding her daughter, surrounded by love and security, finally free from the weight of their judgment. Emma made a small cooing sound, and Serena smiled. You're going to grow up strong, she whispered. You're going to know your worth isn't determined by what others think of you. You're going to understand that patience is power, that kindness is strength, and that standing up for yourself isn't cruelty, it's survival. She pressed a kiss to Emma's forehead. And you're going to know that your mother was someone who refused to accept the story others tried to write for her. I rewrote the ending, Emma. I took their narrative of my worthlessness and turned it into a testimony of their failure. Later that evening, Serena composed a brief email to Ethan. No lengthy explanation, no emotional processing, just a simple message with a single attached photo. Emma sleeping peacefully in her nursery, surrounded by safety and love. The email read, "This is what you chose to walk away from. This is what your cruelty cost you. She will grow up knowing she's loved, valued, and protected. Everything you failed to provide me. You made your choice. Now live with it." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Ethan would receive it, would see his daughter for the first and possibly last time, would understand the magnitude of what he'd lost. Whether that understanding led to growth or bitterness was his choice to make. But Serena was done carrying the weight of his emotions. She'd given him truth, clarity, and one small mercy. What he did with it was no longer her concern. As night fell over the Wellington estate, Serena stood at the window of Emma's nursery, watching the stars emerge one by one. She thought about all the women who'd endured similar treatment, women who'd been told they were nothing, who'd absorbed abuse and cruelty, who'd been thrown away when they were no longer convenient. She hoped her story would reach some of them, would show them that patience and strategy could be more powerful than rage, that justice was possible even when it seemed impossible. The Whitfield empire was gone, but what had replaced it was something far more valuable, a network of people who'd been compensated for their suffering, a series of lessons about accountability and consequences, and a child who would grow up knowing that her mother was a force of nature disguised as a quiet woman with infinite patience. Ethan, Veronica, and Vanessa would spend the rest of their lives confronting what they'd done, living with reduced circumstances, rebuilding from nothing. Whether they emerged better people was uncertain, but they would emerge changed. That much was guaranteed. And Serena? Serena would move forward, unburdened by bitterness, focused on building a beautiful life with her daughter and father, secure in the knowledge that she'd faced her demons and won. Not through violence or cruelty, but through intelligence, patience, and an unwavering belief that actions must have consequences. As she placed Emma in her crib and dimmed the lights, Serena allowed herself one final thought about the Whitfields. They'd called her nothing, but in the end, She'd been everything they'd feared: powerful, strategic, unbreakable, and utterly beyond their reach. The story that began with a woman standing in the rain, pregnant and humiliated, ended with that same woman standing in the light, holding her daughter, surrounded by love, having reshaped the world around her through nothing but patience and precision. The Whitfields had tried to write her ending, but Serena had written theirs instead. And in doing so, she'd proven the most important truth of all, that underestimating the quiet ones is always a fatal mistake. Because when someone you've dismissed finally speaks, when someone you've broken finally rises, when someone you've called nothing finally shows you who they really are, the destruction isn't loud or dramatic. It's silent, surgical, and absolutely devastating. The Whitfields learned that lesson too late, but they learned it completely. And they would never, ever forget it. Neither would anyone else who heard the story and wondered whether cruelty truly goes unpunished. Serena Wellington had proven that it doesn't, not when the victim is patient enough, smart enough, and strong enough to make sure justice prevails. And in the end, that's the only ending that ever mattered. Thanks for watching. Glad you enjoyed the story. Drop a comment telling us the part of the story you enjoyed most.